Welcome everyone to the Receivable Savvy live Q&A webinar. I'm Ernie Martin, founder and managing director of Receivable Savvy, where we provide research and best practice to help finance and accounting professionals master order to cash. We're joined today by our special guest, Elaine Nowak, Director, Product Management and Marketing for HighRadius. What Elaine and I will cover today is robotic process automation, how to achieve 90% plus straight through cash application using your own system. Elaine has some interesting and compelling information to share for any organization that desires to ensure the cash application portion of their invoice to cash process is maximized and running at an extremely high level of efficiency. Because really the bottom line for any company like the ones participating on this webinar are A, to increase cash flow, and B, maximize working capital. And we want to leverage technology to do that, and we'll cover that today. But before we begin, let's cover a couple of logistical things. First, all participants are in listen-only mode, but during the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the question or comments field to submit your question. And at an appropriate time during the presentation, we'll pause and answer that question. We'll also have time at the end for any additional questions. So, without further ado, Elaine, thank you for joining us. Welcome, and tell us what we'll be covering today.
We're going to be learning how to achieve 90% plus straight through cash application, and all of this using your own system that you have in place. Again, my name's Elaine. Here's my contact information. As a director of product marketing, I really kind of work to market our products to make sure that our customers understand what we do, that we strategize on what the offerings should be, what our key messages should be, and how we position our products to the marketplace. So today, I'm going to be covering four main areas. I'm going to be talking a little bit about electronic payment processing and what the issues are that many companies are finding. And then I'll get a little bit into robotic process automation, what that's all about. And then I'm actually going to get into a little bit more in-depth. How does RPA work in the cash application life cycle? And we'll get into the specifics of that as well. So I want to talk a little bit about what are the barriers that companies are facing. So what we're finding that, and this is actually according to a survey that was done by the Institute of Finance and Management, and they conducted the survey in 2014. And the majority of organizations that responded said that actually 27% said that there was no standard remittance format, and this became one of the biggest barriers when they're trying to increase their receipt of electronic payments. And what they also found was that there was insufficient IT resources, no integration in the back office, and that, again, among the top four answers was it was difficult to actually reconcile the electronic payments with the remittance that were coming in. So the upshot of this is many organizations ended up staying with checks because these became prohibitive. So when we look at what happens in the electronic payment processing, we can break this down into three main steps that the cash application team has to go through. So the first we have is that you need to capture and you need to collect all the remittance. So all that electronic remittance, wherever it's coming in from, has to be captured. And then once that remittance is captured, then the second step is that remittance needs to be linked to the payment. So once the payment and the remittance are linked together, then the third step is that linked file needs to be matched to the open invoices that are in whatever enterprise resource planning system that you have, whatever ERP you're running. So this would be the effort that's required. So how would you be able to automate this process? And what I'm going to jump right in and say, well, robotic process automation technology is a great way for you to automate all of these processes and to reduce the manual work that's required. What I've seen is that a lot of companies have they just have a lot of a hodgepodge of tools. They might have OCR for reading checks. They might even have spreadsheets when they maintain the specifics of a certain customer. And what's happening is these partial solutions, they only take care of part of this manual effort, right? And then organizations, what they really need is an automation technology that can help them across the entire cash application process from end to end. And robotic process automation is the automation that could do this for an organization. So let's try this again, Ernie. Let's try another poll question.
Okay.
If you think we've ironed out our technical glitch.
Yes, actually we did.
What I'd like. Okay, great.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do is ask the audience now. So what's their opinion on RPA?
Okay.
So you should see the question pop up, and the answer should be, I've never heard of RPA. So those of you can honestly answer the question, say, I don't even know what you're talking about. And that's fine. Click that button. You might have heard that, yes, I know RPA, but it's complicated. It's expensive. Take that selection. You could say, oh, it's a fancy term, another one of these buzzwords. Who knows what it means? It doesn't do anything much. Or you might be a person who says, hey, I want to try it out. It might be worth seeing if it can help my organization. And then you can also say, I'm not sure. Maybe you've heard of it or you haven't heard of it, but you're not sure. So that would be answer number 5. So we'll just give you a few more seconds here to answer those questions and see what people are saying about RPA.
Okay, and we've got a few more seconds remaining, so everyone who's in listen mode only, feel free to go ahead and give your opinion based on poll questions available and the answers available. So when we're...
Now, I'm not sure, Ernie, are you able to see the percentages of the responses?
Yeah, we've got about half who voted so far.
Okay.
So we'll leave it open for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, final chance. Okay, so we will close the poll, and then we will share the results. And so this is what we've got so far. We've got, in terms of the answers, I've never heard of RPA before. It's complicated or expensive, or it's a fancy term, nothing great. We've got answers really settling in. It may be worth a try, or I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can convince everybody that it's worth a try.
Okay.
Okay, so going a little bit further into what is robotic process automation. So again, this is the definition at HighRadius. This is what we put together in sort of trying to explain what it's about. And really we can break it down into 2 distinct areas. There's artificial intelligence-based solutions, and this type of technology is specifically used for capturing and collecting remittance data as it applies to Cash App. And then the other area is customized business rules, and this is really the RPA that's used for linking and matching payments and then the invoices that are open in the system. The greatest benefit about RPA systems is that because it's robotic technology, it's able to ramp up more quickly. So it's able to be implemented, put in place, and get your teams up to speed and already seeing streamlined and optimized processes much more quickly. What else you'll see with RPA is that it requires minimal intervention. So it doesn't require a ton of IT work and upfront. And it also maintains itself over time. So what the other benefit is that it's actually, in the case of artificial intelligence, it's self-learning and it just gets better as time goes on. AI especially is very powerful. It is able to read a ton of different kinds of information, including remittance or checks or claims and PODs. And it doesn't matter what format it is in. The artificial intelligence is able to read those documents, whether they're paper scans, whether the data is coming in as an EDI file or an email, or if it's on a web portal and it needs to be extracted, or if it's a PDF. So when we look at the cash application automation system, what we can see is that artificial intelligence and the RPA technology can automatically process the payments that come in from the bank and the remittance that are coming in from all over the place, regardless of format, regardless of how they're captured. So let's take a little closer look at the aggregating and capturing of the remittance part, the first step in processing your cash application. So when we go back to what I talked about RPA being, this is where the artificial intelligence-based solution piece comes in. So the data capture and the issues that a lot of organizations face goes back to that first survey and that poll question that we didn't get an opportunity to ask. But it was that many people say it's these multiple remittance formats. That's a real challenge. that there's no standard. All these remittances come in all different ways, and so therefore you have to read all these files distinctly. And then the other challenge is that this remittance comes in from all these different sources. It might be in an email, it might be on a customer portal that you have to log into, it might come in as a digital file or an EDI file, and in various formats. So when we look at the actual automation piece and we say, well, how does remittance capture work with RPA? What RPA is a series of tools. And these tools and these engines, these parsers, they all work with the native remittance type. So if it comes in as an email, then an email parser is going to be able to read that information, whether that remittance information comes in as part of the body of that email, or whether that remittance comes in as the attachment on the email. If it's the information resides on a customer portal, well, normally an analyst or the team members would have to go in on the internet, they'd have to log into that web portal, then they would have to browse through the portal to get to where that exact information and remittance is. What the web aggregation engine is able to do, it's able to extract that information from the web portal automatically. If it's an EDI file, then we'll see an EDI parser would go in and be able to extract that information from that EDI file and populate it into the system. And in the same way, OCR is also part of RPA insofar as if it's a check payment and the check information is coming in, that OCR can scan that image and be able to capture that data for that remittance information. So let's go a little deeper. How is that email capture done, and how does that aggregation happen? So here's an example. A customer sends an email, and they have their remittance detail. So that information is automatically forwarded to a secure email box. And then once that information is there, in this example, the payment and the remittance, the information is all sent in the body of the email. So what that email parser is able to do, this engine reads the text in the body of the email. It's able to identify the invoice numbers, it reads the text that's there, it's able to see the amounts that's there, even being able to read what the discount. And the artificial intelligence is able to orchestrate how this engine runs. So that information that was in that example, the body of the email, is then extracted from the email, and then it loads it into the system as, in this case, the example of our system here is that it becomes received data. And once that received data is in the system, then the artificial intelligence also, it kicks in and it processes that and transforms that data to make sure that the right data points are lining up on the right reference fields in the right columns within the ERP system. So now web aggregation. So we talked about how the email parsing engine works. Now let's talk a little bit about what is web aggregation and what does a web aggregation do. So in this example, I think it's easier if I use a sort of world example that maybe other people have used or they're familiar with, Kayak. Some other examples, this is really what we call a content aggregation, right? So it's an engine that's able to go out and take information from all different places and bring it all together. I think Trivago is another example that's for hotels. You see those commercials on TV nowadays. So what Kayak does is you fill in that form and you write down where you're going to, where you're coming from, where you're going to in terms of airport, and then you say when you want to fly. And what it does, once you hit submit, then it goes out to all these different websites. It automatically logs into these different websites. So this robotic engines go out, and these engines then fill in these forms like instantaneously within seconds. And then it will take that information that it acquires and brings it all back and summarizes that information for you. So when you click that search button, within seconds you get those results. And you get these flight comparisons from multiple travel sites. So this Kayak web aggregation engine, it conducts the search and tabulates the info and provides you the results. So how does that work when we're looking at in terms of invoices and cash application? So let's say that your customer actually, in this example here, VendorNet, and the information resides on a portal. So the details of these paid invoices are on this website. So normally, like I talked about earlier, the person would go in, log in, browse the information, download what they need. But the artificial intelligence-based technology, it's smart enough to automatically log in directly to that portal, and then it parses the information that's present in that web portal, extracts exactly what it needs. Then it takes that extracted information and it puts it again into that received data on the system, and it populates it in the system. So once that information is parsed, then it is transformed, and that transformed and processed information then appears in the transformed data. So now it's within the system and able to be applied to the correct payment and remittance information. So let's look at a case study. I always find that people say, well, where have you done this? When has this been done? And how does it work for a particular client? So in this case, I want to talk a little bit, just a quick example of a French multinational company that specializes in business services. So they have more than 1 million customers, this particular client. And what they were finding, they had formats for hundreds of different types of remittance, hundreds of formats. And the way that this remittance information was coming into them, it varied greatly. So they would have it coming from all over in all different formats with all different information. So the problem was they had to dedicate their team, had to spend so much time. They were processing manually 800 to 900 payments a week, and they were getting something in excess of 1,500 emails a day with these million clients. So you can understand how manually intensive this process was. So what we were able to do is we implemented the cash application automation solution, and we were able to automate this at all steps of the electronic file transfer and that payment processing. So what we were able to achieve was, again, extract that remittance information, whether it's from the web, the email. We took the payment information from the bank using the solution, and that RPA technology was able to not only identify the payments, but it was also able to extract the deductions and code those automatically. So this particular client was able to achieve 80% no-touch automation, where previously this was taking them hours and hours, days, a week. So we look at, in the grand scheme of how robotic process automation works, in this example we have the wheel of gears that will represent the different engines as it extracts the remittance, and then it's able to capture and collect that information. So that artificial intelligence, that machine learning technology, it just gets smarter over time as well. So as it recognizes patterns on the emails that are coming in, and it recognizes patterns in the EDI files and where things reside in the web portals, it gets smarter. It sort of applies that information, and then it actually learns over time. So you'll have minimal manual intervention for this data capture and the extraction of that data. So when we look at the next step in the linking and the payments to the remittance file, again, it's another challenge that people found. So how does robotic process automation apply in this case? So here, this is where the customized business rules would kick in. So the linking engines and those parsing engines take all that remittance data. And now that information has been gathered together, and using these business rules, it can intelligently link the payment file with the remittance file. So business rules, they're created based on the identification of known particulars for a certain file format. So that means that it's able to identify specific criteria. And then these rules are used to translate that specific set of data. So when we look at the cash application process, and we find, well, a lot of times it's not so straightforward to even link that remittance and payment manually. What they find is that they can't establish who the correct customer is. Or perhaps maybe even there's no remittance. All they're getting is a payment file from a particular customer. So sometimes something was not so simple as just say, okay, this payment, and you can tell exactly how it lines up with the remittance. It may not be so straightforward. So the payment they're making and the details of that payment may not be enough. So you have to figure out what payments refer to and which remittance are tied to them. So where that might be done manually, this can actually be done using RPA. So the RPA takes this business rules. And in the same way an analyst might use contextual data and other information, the system will do this automatically. So it might look at information such as, okay, what was the email sender domain name? And does it match up? What was the subject of the email? Does that give us clues as to the remittance and the payment and how they might be linked? It looks at the MICR number or maybe the invoice number if that comes in. It'll look at any criteria that it might receive from that remittance data and the payment data that's received from the bank. And what the business rules, they're able to be stored, and then this library of rules are built up and added to over time. So even if there's an exception that happens, then that can be created into a rule, and then the next time that will automatically be processed. So if you look a little bit more closely at what these business rules look like, again, it's an intelligent linking solution, and there's tons of different kinds of linking rules that are available. Now, that shouldn't scare you because rules, these are very easily customized. The interface that we use is very user-friendly to update. So you want to make sure that regardless of the solution that you go with, you want to make sure that that solution comes preloaded with a comprehensive rules library. And you want to make sure that that rules library performs in more than 95% of business scenarios. So let's just take a look at an example, go into a little bit deeper on what these business rules look like. So here, it categorizes. So this has to do with customer identification. So how does the system automatically identify who the customer is? So these are typically defined using multiple parameters. So in this instance, you can see the examples. There's a MICR-based customer identification action. There's an invoice-based customer action identification. There's a name-based. There's an alias-based. Now, when you set up these business rules or when these business rules are in the system, you can also prioritize the sequence which these rules are applied. So in essence, that means you tell the system once that, okay, first I want you to look for the alias. Is the aliases, the series of aliases that are available, how do I match them up with the parent name or the master customer name in the system? And it's able to run through that. If it can't find the alias, then it goes to the next one. Okay, let's see, is it name-based? If it can't find the name, it'll go to the next one. It's invoice-based and so forth. So defining the priorities and the sequence, this allows the system to quickly run through and extract the right information. So if we delve a little bit deeper, you'll see that if we add the aliases, so again, in the system, you customize this. You say, okay, here's all the various ways in which this company is referred to, through its initials, through the acronym, maybe it's a different short name. So all these different aliases are listed and become part of the business rules library. So this eliminates the manual customer lookup that organizations would have to go through when a payment is received, and you get one of these aliases and you're like, oh gosh, who's that? Which customer is that again? So it automatically applies all these different aliases and is able to say, this is this customer, this is who it matches to in the system. So here you can see an example of a payment that was received. The alias came in, it was immediately recognized, and then it put it in as the payer. Instead of AWI, it was able to say, well, that parent company name, that master customer name, it's associated whole. And it updates that data in the system so that it directly links to that master file. So let's take a look at another case study about linking payments to the correct customer. So in this case, this was a client that was a French multinational food products corporation. And what they had were different aliases for different business units. And what they had created manually was a customer code map that they used. They had to use this according to each location because the different locations had different aliases. And their customers were having to deal with all 4 of these different locations at once. So it took a lot of setup. It was very complex. It was very inflexible in the way that the rules ran and the way that the lookups had to take place. Because each location had a different series of specifications to link the remittance to the customer. So they first, the challenge was that the teams had to first figure out where the alias email was coming from, which business unit was it coming from, which customer was it coming from, and which business unit did it apply to. So what they chose to do instead was to implement a robotic process automation system. And they used these system rules and these controls that were built in to differentiate any of these shared customers across these multiple business units. And they were able to handle them. Each one of those unique handling requirements became automated. Now, the implementation was so successful that the majority of their processing issues with all of these different remittance and payment linking were solved, and they were able to reduce the number of employees that they had dedicated to this cash application processing at their locations across the nation. So tremendous success. They were able to scale their automation operations and really reallocate those resources. I'll give you another example of a case study where there's no remittance at all. So what do? You just get a payment. You're not sure of the amount. What is it? What does this apply to in terms of that invoice? And you have no clue from a remittance doc. So this particular customer is a leading coffee house company, and they actually had 20% of the payments that they received had no remittance at all. They were just getting the payment and no other additional information. So they used to have a cash application analyst would sit down and they'd have to look at that payment detail, and they had to figure out how are they going to close their open AR entries. So what they were not able to do was, find those specific AR entries, follow those specifications, and make those payment information. They had to figure out what account did it have to be posted on. Or maybe they thought, okay, do I just post it on the account? Do I just post it to the oldest AR? Do I post it to the newest AR? It became a real challenge for them. So again, RPA to the rescue. Even when there was a no remittance scenario, what the system was able to do was to run through the business rules using the automation software, and was able to read that available payment data. It was able to extract the date of the payment, extract the amount of the payment, and other available criteria, all of this automatically, and then this RPA was able to actually open the AR and the invoices and match those two things together so that it was able to close invoices in the system. And on the majority of these no remittance scenarios, they were able to receive 80% became straight through. So what had been a completely manual process before, now 80% of that 20% was able to be processed. No remittance, but it was able to go straight through and be able to close those invoices. So robotic process automation, it handles that linking of payments and remittance. It's able to achieve much greater rates of straight-through processing for teams. So it frees up all that tedious manual effort that's required to do some of these processes. So in that third step that we talk about a little bit here, so now we've taken the remittance, we've collected it all together. We've now linked the remittance and the payment information together. So the next step is, well, how do we take that link file and how does it apply towards the open AR entries? So looking at the robotic process automation technology, again, it's going to be these customized business rules are used to automate the matching of the payments and the invoices. So when we look at the system and we understand along the three-step process that I outlined earlier, what are the issues that teams will find when they're trying to match the remittance and the payment file with the open AR entries? What they found was a lot of times the information was just partial information, or maybe the data itself, maybe the invoice number was truncated, that the customer sent in only a partial information. Another challenge was that there was multiple ERP systems. It wasn't just one instance of SAP, for example, or Oracle. They had multiple instances in various versions, and they had to look in all these different ERP systems to figure out where these linked files needed to be reconciled. And lastly, a lot of the problems that they had too were that the deductions would be listed on these payment remittance files, but then how do you reconcile the deductions and code them correctly? So if a customer sends in, and maybe they had their own set of codes that they used, how do you reconcile them with your internal set of codes and map them correctly so you know you're making, you're applying that deduction to the right promotion and to the right trade settlement or what have you. So again, now here we are, we look to this, what the system is able to do, it takes out that manual process and says, okay, now using these various criteria, automating these criteria, taking information, even if the customer is not sending the exact invoice number and in their remittance, the system is able to extract and streamline this process. So let's look at example here when we want to match the invoice, the information as it comes in. So the manual effort previously had been this incomplete information. Now you're going to have to look all this stuff. Try to figure out. Do a little sleuthing. Become a detective instead of an analyst. So let's say you ask the customer to give you your invoice number and they don't do that. They actually give you a purchase order number instead, or PO as they call them. So where in the past it would be an analyst, they'd have to research and figure this out to get that right invoice number, the RPA-based system recognizes that this is a PO number. And it understands that by using these other criteria, it's able then to use other criteria to match that payment and remittance information with the correct invoice in the system. So that, let's say an example here, that truncated information, it was missing a couple digits off of what was the correct invoice number because the customer sends it in and their system is only a 7-character system. You have a 9-character system, so they send it in with 7 characters. The RPA is able to automatically extract that data to add the appropriate number and match it with the AR. So it transforms that data in the system and it puts it in correctly. So even if it's a partial invoice number, it's able to intelligently match it with the information in the actual system, the actual invoice. So here, again, this is where if we're diving into what does that business rule look like, that says it recognizes that when this number comes in this certain way, it realizes it's a truncated number, it realizes it's a PO number, it realizes it's not the invoice number. So regardless of whether that information is just partial data that's been sent into the system, the sophisticated business rules, it pre-appends that number or adds that number and the specified number of characters to build out to create the proper invoice number so it matches directly with your system. So now that transformed data is matched with the OpenAR. So again, let's take a look at a customer case study where there was only partial and truncated data that was coming in. So what this particular, a leading American coffee house chain and coffee company, what they were finding was the cash application team was receiving multiple cases of sales order numbers or purchase order numbers being mentioned instead of invoice numbers. Or they were also finding that there was partial invoices, so that the invoice was missing a bunch of numbers, whether it was before or after. And every time that one of these scenarios came in, the cash application team had to manually figure out what was going on with this bad data, with this missing data. All of this was handled manually. So they'd have to go in and with this partial information system, for example here, this invoice was received. It was missing the 2 digits that go ahead of the actual invoice number itself. So they were looking for an automation system that was going to be smart enough to identify that the number in this reference field was only a partial invoice number, that it would recognize that the number that was being received needed to have a pre-appended set of numbers added to it. So they were literally looking for someone that could transform the data so that would match their proper invoice numbers. Well, RPA to the rescue once again. And as a result, for all of these cases in which they had this partial data, this truncated data, the missing data, the system was able to process. So over the course of 10 months, after they installed this automation system, they were able to process 91,772 cases of partial truncated data straight through. So even if you think on a day-to-day basis, maybe there's just a couple that you're handling because it's missing data and you're looking them up, or your teams are doing that kind of manual work. Well, over the course of time, those day-to-day small hours of work add up. And when you think about 91,000 cases over the course of 10 months, that is a lot of manual work that can be completely eliminated. So I have another case study. I mentioned earlier another problem that an issue with the matching was multiple ERP systems. So what do you do when you have more than one system in which invoices reside? So this example is an American beauty products manufacturer based in New York, but they also have an international presence. So they had different ERPs at their different locations. So they had locations in Canada, Puerto Rico, and the United States. And each one of these had a different SAP, or they had the Sage MAS 90 ERP. So all these different business units, and even though they were on SAP, they were not even the same version. So what they needed was a solution that could run on all these different systems and coordinate the effort of these different business units located in different areas, and be able to not only run off these 3 locations, but as they acquired companies moving forward, they wanted to make sure that if other different ERP systems and platforms came online, that this automated system would also be able to handle those ERP systems as well. So again, the organization automated all the steps in their electronic file payment processing. And currently, they're able to provide approximately 80% line item automation. So 80% of their processing is done straight through. They're able to link their remittance and payments, and they're able to reconcile it with all the databases that they have, both their SAP ERP systems and their Sage MAS 90 ERP system. So, and they're also able to identify the payments with deductions and to code them properly. So that's another issue that many clients face. So let's take a closer look at deduction handling, and how does ERP, is it able to handle deductions and the coding of deductions? It may not surprise you that I'm going to say, yes, it does. RPA does handle deduction line items. So what the RPA does is, again, it uses this intelligent pattern matching, and it uses transformation rules engine to be able to understand. It can apply customer-specific rules. So regardless of how your customer codes their deductions, it's able to take that information, identify those codes, and the way that those deductions are being sent to the system. And then it separates that deduction data in the ERP system so that it can be analyzed and handled separately from the regular payment information. So your organization's internal codes then are matched to each one of the customers that you have, any of their custom codes that they might use, anything that's supplied by your customers. And again, it generates this separate area so these coded deduction files can be easily analyzed. So another example of a client case study for deduction management. So this was a French multinational food products corporation. So it was the same company that we talked about earlier, one of the other companies I talked about earlier, but they had issues related to deduction coding. So what they found were customers, they were claiming deductions for their trade promotions, and they were having difficulty matching what the customer was claiming with what they had in their system, because the customers were using these specific deduction codes that were for their own company standards. So the company's deduction codes, they would come into the system, and they weren't able to reconcile it unless they did the manual sleuthing, the manual detective work to figure out, well, what does this deduction refer to? Which trade settlement is it talking about here? Which promotion that we had going on? So the automated deduction code mapping. It was able to match those customer codes to the organization codes. So if there was multiple deductions, and it was able to recognize if they started with the same letters, then the system was automatically able to merge those two deductions together. And the RPA system that was installed, it was able to automatically categorize, and then it was able to properly map the right customer codes to the right company's deduction codes, and then merge any related deductions. So it was a tremendous help for this organization. And as a matter of fact, team members who had been dedicated to deduction code handling were significantly reduced across the various locations. So they were able to really take those resources and reallocate where they worked. So I gave you a breakdown of the details about how robotic process automation works. And when I say that robotic process automation can achieve end-to-end cash application processing, I mean it. There is this opportunity for technology to be able to do this for you. So just to summarize, we have the artificial intelligence, which is able to take the payments that are coming in from the bank, and then it's able to aggregate and capture the remittance that comes in from all over the place in various formats, and to bring all this into your system automatically. And then we have the business rules that handles the linking of the payments and the remittance files, and the business rules also handle the matching of that linked file to the invoices, and it also handles deduction coding and is able to extract the deduction information, code it properly, and separate it out so that it can be analyzed separately. So when we look at the steps from end to end, we see that automation is possible, that the capture and aggregation of remittance can be automated, that the linking of remittance and payment can be automated, and that the matching of the remittance and the open AR in the system can also be automated. So I just wanted to share with you some clients of HighRadius that were able to achieve straight-through remittance processing and what kind of rates they were seeing. So Community Coffee was a great case. They have upwards of 98% straight-through processing, and once the system went live, they achieved this 98% straight-through within a week and a half. So it only took a week and a half for them to go from a manual process to 98% straight-through processing. Church & Dwight, which is the famous Arm & Hammer, we actually helped them with their electronic payments for ACH, and were able to auto-apply 95% of their ACH payments. For Johnson & Johnson, over the course of 3 months, we were able to get them up to a 95% straight-through processing. For Starbucks, they were able to achieve an 86% straight-through processing. Coleman, the makers of lanterns, and they also make a lot of camping equipment and supplies, they were able to achieve a 94% straight-through processing rate. Reckitt Benckiser, 98.5% straight-through processing rate for their cash application. And then Coty, who is a beauty supply company, was able to achieve 87% straight-through processing. Okay, so having heard me talk now for a good portion of about 45 minutes or so, I'm going to ask this question. So are you interested, and I'm talking to my audience out here, are you interested in learning how RPA could benefit your organization specifically? So the poll question, Ernie, I'm going to count on you that the poll question is going to pop up, and we're going to have our attendees say, well, yes, of course, I didn't know RPA could do so much. That's, of course, the answer I like to have selected.
Okay. And everyone should see our quick poll question here. And so just a few seconds of allowing it to sort of settle, and we'll let people read the possible answers and give them a few more seconds. It's a lot to take in, but there's a lot of great information that you're sharing, Elaine. So excellent job.
Yes, and Ernie, I do have to say I am from New York, so I tend to talk a little fast. So again, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer. You and I together answer whatever. If anyone came in, or if people have questions now, or even after the webinar, if they had questions or they want to reach out, by all means, I'm happy to do so.
Sure, absolutely. And I used to live in New Jersey, so I understood every word you said.
Yes.
Okay, so
I live in New Jersey too, so there you go.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So we've got a few more seconds. We've got 75% who have answered, so we will give it another 3, 2, 1, and we'll close the poll question, and we'll share the results. So it looks like we've got most of the answers are fairly top-heavy, which I guess is a good sign. Of course, I don't know RPA could do so much, or I didn't know RPA could do so much at 67%, and 33% said yes, in the near future, they would be interested in learning how RPA could benefit their organization.
I think that's great, actually, Ernie, because I think RPA and technology, it sometimes can be a little scary and intimidating when people hear these new buzzwords and what is it all about? Is it robots taking over our jobs, and sort of that scariness that might come from the incorporation of a new term.
Yep.
But honestly, it can do so much for an organization, especially in the area of cash application processing, and it can really help companies achieve and streamline and optimize, and it's tremendous, actually, and it just gets better day by day. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and we agree with that sentiment too. We think there's a lot of benefit RPA can provide to organizations. So we're going to close the results here, and we will turn it back over to you, Elaine, to wrap up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ernie. I'm just going to take a few minutes now just to talk about HighRadius, just a little bit about our company. We're headquartered in Houston, Texas, so it's pretty far from New York, gotta say. We've actually been around for more than 10 years, for more than a decade. We've been offering end-to-end credit-to-cash automation services. We actually have more than 400 employees globally. We have 200 plus customers, and actually our customer base is growing. We've actually got we're number one in terms of Fortune 1000 market-based companies and the deals that we've won in the last 2 years. And I think part of that can be attributed to the focus that we have on delivering value to our clients. It's a super important aspect. And I think that's also why we've had some tremendous growth. And over the course of the years, we've just added more and more employees, and we've actually been recognized as one of the fastest growing companies as well. We actually also pride ourselves on being leaders. We love to educate, especially about the latest advances in technology, to discuss. We understand the pain that many of our clients are going through, and we want to do what we can to help them. We do a lot of speaking. We attend a lot of trade shows. We have partnerships with a lot of industry organizations. We are the preferred partner for NACHA for their cash application. We are a platinum partner for Credit Research Foundation. And of course, we partner with Receivable Savvy, obviously. Here we are today. So we actually are going to be exhibiting at AFP at the end of the month. And we're also going to be at the CRF Forum in Fort Lauderdale later on this month as well. So if anyone out there is attending either one of those shows, we really encourage you to come out and join us. And of course, for all of our users, we have our big annual user conference that comes up in February. It's going to be in February this year, up in the Woodlands at a great resort up there. So we're actually going to open it up to not just current users, but we're going to look for people who want to hear more about what HighRadius HighRadius credit to cash automation system can do for them as well. So having said all that, now I'm going to turn it back over to you again, Ernie, and say, do we have any questions that came in
Okay, excellent.
today?
Yes, actually, we do. We have two questions that have come in, and first of all, Elaine, thank you again for sharing a lot of valuable information. I know there's a lot to take in, but there are many detailed nuances regarding understanding RPA and how it works. But really, it's very simple if you look at it. So I think you've done an excellent job of sharing with our audience and giving them what they need to know. So with that, I'll read the first question from Joseph, and it reads: even with 90% straight through cache application, isn't there still a need for a good amount of manual intervention to correct that remaining 10% or so?
Yes. So I mentioned all these percentages of all these clients, and they were anywhere from 80 to 98%. The first thing I want to just make sure that's clear is when we talk about straight-through processing and cache application rates, you want to make sure that whoever your vendor is, whatever solution you have, it's important to ask the question what that percentage represents. Is that on account or is that on invoice? Because I think that makes a big difference as to the accuracy and the actual optimization that you're achieving. But when we look at exceptions, okay, so that other 10% that Joseph is asking about, I mean, that's going to be handled by people. So, but the beauty of straight-through processing is that when all this manual, repetitive, tedious tasks are done using automation, then the team now has time to dedicate to those exceptions, and they can concentrate on some of those more complex tasks that might need a set of human hands. So these resources who spend an inordinate amount of time on this kind of manual work, they can go towards these value-added tasks, such as following up on collections, let's say, or phone calls to establish stronger relationships with their customers, and so forth. The things that robotic process automation wouldn't be able to handle.
Okay, excellent. And by the way, before we go to our next question, if the audience does have a question that they would like to submit, please do so by going to the question or hand raising section on your panel and typing in your question, or you can use the chat feature to ask your question as well. So the next question we have is from Rebecca, and she asks, how much hands-on or ongoing maintenance and monitoring is required when incorporating an RPA solution around cache application? So I think if we understand that question correctly, once you install it and once you implement it, you continue to have to watch it. Do you have to continue to watch it, rather? And if so, to what degree, or if not, is there any monitoring at all once implemented?
Right. Okay. So this question is, so there's a little bit of sort of like, is there supervision required? So once, and this is the difference between, let's say, Community Coffee, who was up and running in a week and a half, and Johnson & Johnson that took 3 months. Because part of what you do in your implementation and the mapping and the blueprinting that takes place is running through, seeing what kind of hit rates you're getting on invoice, and then determining those exceptions, creating in the system the right business rules to handle them. And this process, it actually depends on how complex your transactions are. So the more complex, you might have a little bit more upfront work, but again, if they're straightforward, then you'll achieve much greater hit rates much more quickly. But regardless, over the course of time, that straight-through processing percentage just improves because the system is able to intelligently identify patterns, and you'll know when something isn't going straight through. That's when it becomes part of your exceptions. So again, you'll have that. It could be a very small percentage. It might be, or it might be 15%. It might be 2%. And then even then, those exceptions can be looked at, and can those be translated into some kind of way that those can be automated, and that's how the system, but then over time, that system will just get more, it'll just get smarter, and you'll see more processing that happens straight through.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. And we do have a final question from Francis, and I will say, even though we're coming to the top of the hour, if anyone does have any other questions, feel free to use the chat or the questions feature in your panel. So our next and possibly final question is there an ideal volume of transactions that is ideally suited for RPA around cash application?
Okay, so an ideal volume, to say that, okay, it's most optimized if there's X amount of transactions. Is that what we're looking at in your question?
Yeah, that's the way I understand the question. So, for example, if someone has 3 transactions a year versus 3 million, so maybe for 3 transactions a year, not sure, but certainly for 3 million, that would, it seems like this solution and this technology would be of great benefit. But somewhere in between there, when does it really start to kick in, if there is such a thing, when it starts to really add value?
Yeah, I would say 3 transactions. I'm not sure how big that company might be. But the thing about RPA and robotic, just the whole concept of technology, is that it's able to scale. And it can handle a minimal amount, and it can handle tremendously large volumes of data. So an ideal amount, I would say, even if you were to, it really comes down to how much time is your team spending manually. So if your transactions are complex but they can be automated, then you're going to save time, even if you have a small amount of transactions. If your team has, if a lot of your team is spending a lot of time doing these sort of repetitive tasks, and your volume is okay, maybe it's 1,000 transactions a day, you could still benefit from robotic process automation. I think it's almost like, regardless of the amount of transactions, there is parts of your process that could be automated, and that will still save you time and save you money ultimately in the long run, because an RPA system doesn't need to take a break. It doesn't need to have time off. It can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it's a robot, so to speak. So, and the other thing about transactions, I mean, an ideal number, because it's scalable, because it's flexible, that whatever number you have and however much you grow, then the RPA can grow with you. And so it can handle, I think, tremendous volumes, and it would not be a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you for a very detailed answer, Elaine. And I'm just picturing those poor robots not getting any time off during the holidays.
Those poor
robots. So, but no, that's absolutely right. That's one of the benefits of RPA and artificial intelligence in general. So there aren't any additional questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. And first off, I want to thank you, Elaine, for joining us today and carving out time from your busy schedule to walk through what RPA can mean for organizations. And so we really appreciate it. And hopefully we can have you back and we can tackle another topic if that suits you.
Sure, it sounds great. My pleasure. And that's one of the things I love, is just to talk about technology, and there's nothing that makes me happier than to say we can bring value and really kind of just have our clients they just are so happy when they get these systems in place. So spread the word. That's what I love to do. Yep,
excellent. There is one more question that came in, so I guess we'll go ahead and tackle that.
Okay, sure. If people are still listening, sure, why not?
Yep, someone's still listening. So it's from, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Charito. And the question is high radius SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley compliant?
That is a great question, but I am not sure of that answer. So I would have to defer. I'll probably find one of my solution architects and find out for sure. I know just from a high level that compliance is very important to us, and we take security very seriously. So when we handle data in any way at all, but we can get back to Charito, was it? And we will definitely, I'll find out for sure if we're Sarbanes-Oxley compliant.
Okay, excellent. And thank you for your question, Charito. So let's see. there are no other questions, we are a little past the top of the hour. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today and carving time out of your busy schedule. We do appreciate your participation. There will be a recording of the webinar available, and everyone who is in attendance or registered will be able to get a link as to where that resides. And you'll also have information about how to get in touch with HighRadius and how they can walk you through some of what you've seen today. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elaine. And we will see everyone next time on the next webinar we do.